When President Trump locked eyes with one struggling cadet at West Point, no one knew it would change the young man's life forever. West Point wasn't the kind of place where surprises happened often. Everything was planned, timed, and executed with military precision. Schedules were set in stone, routines drilled into muscle memory. But today was different. Cadet Brandon Ellis felt it before he saw it. A shift in the air, an energy that crackled through the ranks like an electric current. It started with whispers, "Something's happening." Then a sudden order to assemble in formation. No explanation, just urgency. Brandon stole a glance at his fellow cadets. Some looked tense. Others were curious, but no one spoke. Then the low hum of engines. A convoy of black SUVs rolled into the courtyard, gliding to a stop in perfect formation. Doors clicked open, and out stepped a team of sharply dressed men in dark suits, Secret Service. That's when Brandon knew. Moments later, the man himself emerged. President Donald Trump. The air tightened. Cadets snapped to full attention. The president walked forward with his signature stride, surveying the group with an unreadable expression. He didn't come with a teleprompter or a prepared speech. This wasn't a ceremony. This was something else. Brandon's heart pounded against his ribs. He had never seen a president in person before. Few people had, but here he was, close enough to see the crisp folds in his suit, the glint of confidence in his eyes. Trump's gaze moved deliberately across the line of cadets, sizing them up like a general before battle. Then, without warning, his eyes locked on Brandon. A split second passed, but it felt like an eternity. Then Trump pointed directly at him. "You," he said. His voice carried over the silent courtyard like a command. "Step forward." Brandon's stomach clenched. What? Why him? His boots felt heavier than usual as he stepped out of formation. He forced himself to stand tall, to push back the doubt gnawing at the edges of his mind. Trump studied him for a moment, then asked, "What's your name, son?" "Cadet Brandon Ellis, sir." Trump nodded slowly, as if turning the name over in his head. Then he asked a question that made Brandon's pulse spike. "You ever doubt yourself?" Brandon froze. The truth? Every day. He had worked his way into West Point through sheer determination, but some nights he lay awake wondering if he was good enough, if he had what it took. But this wasn't a moment for vulnerability, so he gave the answer he thought was expected. "No, sir." Trump tilted his head, considering him. Then he smirked. "That's a good answer." A pause. "But I don't buy it." A ripple of unease ran through the other cadets. Trump's voice carried across the courtyard. "Every leader doubts themselves at some point. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. The difference is what you do with that doubt." He let the words sink in before turning to his aides. "Let's give them a test." Brandon's pulse quickened. A test? What kind of test? Trump turned back to him. "Hope you're ready." Brandon swallowed hard. He had no idea what he was about to face, but there was no turning back now. But when the commander-in-chief throws down a challenge, you don't get to say no. The words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. A test. Brandon barely had time to process it before Trump turned to his aides. "Get a team together," he ordered. "We're going to see what these cadets are made of." The tension in the courtyard shifted. Murmurs spread among the ranks, low and uncertain. This wasn't just another motivational speech. This was something different. Something unexpected. Brandon stole a glance at the other cadets. Had this ever happened before? A president coming in and throwing down a challenge like this? He didn't think so. One of the aides stepped forward, scanning the group. He called out 4 more names, selecting them at random, or at least that's how it seemed. Each cadet stepped out of line, standing shoulder to shoulder with Brandon. Trump glanced at them, then at the officers overseeing the formation. "That'll do." He turned back to the 5 cadets. "Follow me." Brandon's feet felt like lead as he stepped forward. The others fell in beside him. They didn't know what they were walking into, but there was no backing out now. The group was led across the courtyard, past the grand stone buildings of West Point, and toward a waiting Humvee. Secret Service agents flanked them, watching everything with unreadable expressions. The atmosphere was charged, a mix of anticipation and nerves. The moment they climbed into the vehicle, the doors shut with a firm click. The engine rumbled to life, and the Humvee pulled away. No one spoke. Brandon glanced around. 5 cadets, the president, and a handful of his people, all packed into a single vehicle, heading to an unknown destination. The drive felt endless. Outside, the academy grounds blurred past. Every turn, every stop, every acceleration sent a fresh wave of tension through Brandon's chest. He didn't know whether to be excited or terrified. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Humvee slowed. The doors opened, and they were motioned out. Brandon stepped onto a rugged training ground tucked away on the outskirts of the academy. Unlike the pristine courtyards they had left behind, this place looked like a battlefield simulation. Torn up dirt, makeshift barricades, barbed wire, and scattered debris. A staff sergeant stood waiting. His uniform was spotless, but his stance was rigid, his expression all business. He gave the president a firm nod. "Mr. President, it's ready." Trump smirked. "Good." He turned to the cadets, eyes sharp. "Here's the deal." He motioned toward the course. "Out there somewhere is a wounded soldier. Your job? Find him, stabilize him, bring him back." Brandon's stomach clenched. A search and rescue simulation. He had done similar drills before, but never under these conditions. Trump wasn't finished. "One more thing." He let the words settle, scanning their faces. Then his smirk widened. "Only one of you is in charge." The air went still. Brandon barely had time to process the statement before Trump pointed directly at him. "It's you." Brandon's breath caught in his throat. The other cadets turned to him, their expressions unreadable. Trump patted his shoulder. "Show me what you've got, son." A slow, creeping realization settled in. This wasn't just about completing the mission. It was about leadership, about stepping up, about making decisions under pressure. Brandon's mind screamed with doubts, but there was no time for hesitation. The clock was ticking, and now the weight of the mission and his team was on his shoulders. But leadership isn't about being the strongest. It's about what happens when the pressure's on, and there's nowhere to hide. Brandon's heartbeat hammered in his ears. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't trained for this exact moment. But now, he was in charge. The President of the United States had put him on the spot in front of his fellow cadets, and failure wasn't an option. He swallowed hard and turned to face his team. 5 of them, all sharp, all strong. Any one of them could have been picked as the leader. Why him? No time to question it. He squared his shoulders and did what his instructors had drilled into him. Assess, prioritize, execute. "The objective is clear," Brandon said, keeping his voice steady. "Find the wounded, stabilize them, and bring them back in one piece." He scanned the landscape, a chaotic mess of obstacles, trenches, and smoke machines designed to simulate a battlefield. Brandon pointed to Cadet Reynolds, the tallest and strongest of the group. "You're on point. Eyes up. Look for movement, sound, anything that gives away our guy's position." Reynolds gave a short nod. No argument. Brandon turned to Cadet Owens, the fastest. "You flank left. Stay low. If we get slowed down, you're our eyes ahead." Owens clenched his jaw. "Got it." The others? Support and adaptability. No one was standing around. Everyone had a role. Because in a mission, hesitation gets people hurt. Brandon sucked in a breath. "Let's move." They took off at a steady pace, weaving through the uneven terrain. The first challenge came fast. A thick wall of smoke spewing from hidden machines. A visibility trap. Brandon threw up a hand. "Close ranks! Stay tight!" They pushed through, but inside the haze, everything blurred. Sounds warped. Footsteps became echoes. Shadows flickered where no one stood. It was designed to confuse, to disorient. Reynolds nearly veered off course. Owens caught him by the sleeve, yanking him back before he hit a low-lying tripwire. A second slower, and he would have set off a simulated explosion. Brandon's gut twisted. This wasn't a game. The test wasn't just physical, it was mental. "Eyes on me," he called. "We move as one." They powered forward. The smoke thinned, revealing their next challenge. A water trench. Wide, deep, and cold. 2 options. Number 1, wade through, waist-high in water, slowing them down. Number 2, take the rope strung above, but risk a fall. Brandon made the call. Rope it one by one. Reynolds went first, his large frame making it across in seconds. Owens followed with ease. Then the third cadet miscalculated. A sharp slip, a splash. The icy water swallowed him. Brandon cursed under his breath. He and Reynolds reached down, grabbing the cadet's vest and hauling him up. His uniform was soaked, heavy. He'd be slower now. "We good?" Brandon asked. The cadet coughed. "Yeah." No time to dwell on it. "Keep moving." They ran. Faster now, adrenaline kicking in. Barriers. Crawling through dirt. Climbing a 10-foot wall. Brandon's lungs burned, but he didn't stop. Neither did his team. Then they heard it. A weak, static-laced voice crackling from a hidden speaker. "Help! Over here!" Brandon's chest tightened. They were close. The voice was coming from a simulated combat zone. Sandbags, scattered debris, and a collapsed wooden structure. And beneath that structure lay the wounded soldier. Brandon dropped to his knees beside the dummy, his hands moving on instinct. Simulated injuries, broken leg, unconscious but breathing. "Stabilization first," he ordered, adrenaline surging. "Tourniquet the leg. Keep the airway clear." Owens ripped open the med kit. Reynolds secured the head. Every movement had to be precise. Then a voice boomed through the speakers. 1 minute left." Brandon's pulse spiked. They had to move, now. But the last stretch wouldn't be easy. Because getting there is one thing. Getting out? That's where everything goes wrong. Brandon's heart slammed against his ribs. 1 minute, 60 seconds to get the wounded soldier back. The team moved fast, securing the dummy onto a makeshift stretcher. Owens took one side, Reynolds the other. Brandon and the remaining cadets supported the weight as they pushed forward through the simulated combat zone. The final stretch of the course was brutal. Flashing lights simulated gunfire, and deafening explosions shook the ground beneath them. It wasn't real, but it felt real. Brandon's arms screamed in protest. His legs burned. Every muscle told him to slow down. Then, disaster. Reynolds misstepped over a chunk of debris. His foot caught. He lost his balance, hard. The weight of the dummy shifted. The entire stretcher lurched sideways. Owens barely caught it in time. Brandon's gut twisted. They didn't have time for this. "Back up! Lift together!" he shouted, voice raw. They adjusted, hoisted the stretcher again, and forced their way through the last 30 yards. 5 seconds left. The finish line was a blur of motion, shadows, and pounding adrenaline. And then, silence. They had made it. Brandon dropped to his knees, hands on his thighs, gasping for air. Around him the others did the same. Had they done enough? A slow clap echoed through the stillness. Brandon looked up, chest heaving. Trump stood at the edge of the course, watching. His expression was unreadable. "Not bad," he finally said. "Not perfect, but not bad." Brandon wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult. Then Trump motioned toward him. "Walk with me." Brandon hesitated. His uniform was soaked in sweat. His muscles ached. His hands still shook from exertion. But when the president gives you an order, you follow. He rose to his feet, forcing his legs to move, and fell into step beside Trump. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just walked, the sounds of the training ground fading behind them. Finally, Trump broke the silence. "You hesitated." Brandon's stomach clenched. "Sir?" "At the start, when I put you in charge." Trump glanced at him. "You didn't think you were the right guy for the job?" Brandon exhaled slowly. He could deny it, but what was the point? "No, sir, I didn't." Trump nodded as if he expected that answer. "Why?" Brandon struggled for the right words. "Because I'm not the strongest. Because I'm not the fastest. Because someone else could have done it better." but saying it out loud felt like admitting failure. Trump seemed to read his hesitation. Let me tell you something. Leadership isn't about being the best at everything. It's about stepping up when no one else will. Brandon stared at the ground ahead. The words settled in, hitting him in a way he hadn't expected. Trump continued, voice steady. You think every president walks into office knowing all the answers? No. You make decisions. You live with them. Sometimes you get them right. Sometimes you don't. But you don't get to freeze up. Brandon swallowed hard. Trump glanced at him again. You made mistakes today, but you didn't quit. That's what matters. Brandon felt something shift inside him. The weight of doubt, of not being enough, felt a little lighter. Trump stopped walking. He looked Brandon over one last time. Now, he said, a smirk tugging at his lips. Let's see if you're ready for the real test. Brandon's pulse spiked. The real test. What did he mean? Because what came next would be something no one saw coming. Brandon barely had time to catch his breath before Trump's next words hit him like a hammer. Now you're going to make a decision. And there's no right answer, only consequences. Brandon stiffened. His uniform clung to his sweat-drenched skin. His lungs still burned from exertion, and his muscles felt like they might give out at any moment. But the president wasn't offering a break. The others stood a short distance away watching. This test was his alone. Trump motioned toward a table where two aides stood. One of them placed two sealed envelopes in front of him. Pick one, Trump instructed. Brandon's throat went dry. What was this? Some kind of psychological test? He hesitated. What's in them? Trump smirked. That's for you to find out. A slow breath. His hands hovered over the envelopes. One red, one blue. His instincts screamed at him to choose carefully. He reached for the red. Trump's smirk didn't change. Open it. Brandon's fingers fumbled as he tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. One sentence. You fail the mission, but save your team. Brandon's stomach dropped. His hands tightened around the paper. Fail the mission? His entire life, he had been trained to complete the objective at all costs. Failure wasn't an option. Trump gestured to the unopened blue envelope. That one says you complete the mission but lose a man. Brandon swallowed hard. He got it now. This wasn't just about picking a piece of paper. This was about leadership, about choices, about consequences. Trump let the silence stretch before speaking. Real leadership isn't about looking good. It's about living with the weight of your choices. What do you do when both options suck? When people are looking to you, hoping you make the right call, but knowing deep down, he tapped his chest. There's no perfect answer. Brandon felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. A day ago he would have panicked, would have questioned himself. But now? He folded the paper carefully and looked up at Trump. You own the decision, Brandon said, his voice steadier than he expected. You live with it. For the first time, Trump's smirk softened just a fraction. You made the right choice today, kid. Not because it was easy, but because you didn't let it freeze you. Brandon clenched his jaw. He understood now. Trump patted his shoulder. Take that with you. Because this? He motioned to the paper. This is life. And if you can handle this, you can handle anything. Brandon didn't move. The weight of the moment settled deep into his bones. Then Trump turned back to the group. All right, cadets, get back in line. Brandon exhaled, his mind still spinning. He walked in today full of doubt. He was walking out different, but the lesson wasn't over yet. Brandon stepped back into formation, his body exhausted but his mind racing. The other cadets gave him quick glances, some with quiet respect, others with curiosity. They had all been tested physically today, but what had just happened between him and the president? That was different. That was something only he had experienced. Trump turned to the group, his hands in his pockets, his eyes sweeping over the formation. You're not always going to have time to think. You won't always have all the facts. But if you hesitate too long, people get hurt. That's life. That's leadership. His voice was steady, not raised, but it carried through the air like a final lesson in a long, grueling test. The weight of it settled over the cadets, over the officers watching from the sidelines, over Brandon most of all. He wasn't sure he had ever really understood what leadership meant until now. Then, Trump smirked. And if you ever get it wrong? He let the question hang for a second before answering it himself. You own it, you don't blame, you don't fold, you take the hit, and you move forward. Brandon's chest tightened. He had spent so much of his time at West Point worrying about whether he was good enough, whether he measured up, whether someone else could do it better. But that wasn't the point. The point was stepping up anyway, taking responsibility anyway. Because leaders weren't always the smartest or the fastest or the strongest. They were just the ones who made the call. Trump looked him over one last time, then turned to the commanding officers standing at the edge of the field. I like this one, he said, nodding toward Brandon. Keep an eye on him. Brandon felt a ripple of something in his chest. Not pride exactly, something deeper than that. He squared his shoulders. He stood a little taller. As the convoy prepared to leave, Trump glanced back at the group. His tone was lighter now, but the lesson was still there. Remember, leadership isn't about you. It's about what you do for others. With that, he climbed into the SUV. The doors shut. Engines rumbled. The convoy pulled away, leaving the training ground behind. Brandon exhaled, watching until the vehicles disappeared from sight. The moment was over. But something inside him had shifted. This morning he had doubted his place at West Point. Now he knew he belonged. And that changed everything. Some lessons come in the form of books, lectures, and training drills. But the ones that stick, the ones that shape us, they come from moments like these. If you took something from this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know. What's the biggest leadership lesson you've learned in life?